In this chapter, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into our oceans, pun intended. We're going to talk about our surface and our deep water ocean currents. We'll talk about shorelines, which we call a beach, and why it's a dynamic interface and constantly changing. And we'll wrap up talking about the tides and how the moon affects our oceans. But when we look at our oceans, we'll see that the water does not just sit there. Instead, it's being pushed around at a really slow rate. So an ocean current is just a huge mass of water that's flowing from one area to another. And the reason why we have ocean currents at the top of our oceans is all due to the wind. We'll see that as the wind starts blowing across the surface of the water, it's going to start pulling the water along with it. So the reason why we have ocean currents is all due to Earth's wind. But due to something called the Coriolis effect, which we'll dive into multiple times throughout this chapter and the next few, we'll see that the Coriolis effect causes things to curve instead of traveling in a straight line. So when we look at our ocean currents, we see that they develop what are called gyres. And gyres are just these really big circular loops of water within our oceans. And we have 5 major gyres. We have 2 in the Pacific, the North and the South Pacific gyres. We have 1 in the Indian Ocean. And again, we have 2 in the Atlantic, 1 in the North and 1 in the South. Our ocean currents, again, are just going to move in the same way that our atmosphere circulates. The way the air moves is going to pull the surface of that water with it, causing ocean currents. And one thing I want to point out about these 5 main gyres on our planet is that each of them are found between 30 and 60 degrees. You'll notice that the equator, the middle of our planet, doesn't cut through any of these gyres. Instead, they either form above it in the North Pacific or the North Atlantic, or beneath the equator in the South Pacific, South Atlantic, or Indian Oceans. So because these are found in our subtropics, they're sometimes called subtropical gyres. Here, we just want to know that it's basically a giant circle of flowing ocean water. But like most things with earth science, it's not quite as simple as the way that the textbook actually draws things. We saw the gyres on our last couple of slides, but this image is better at showing us how the water is actually moving. In addition to these 5 major gyres, we have smaller currents that move across the surface of our oceans. We're not going to learn about each of them specifically, but I want you to notice that some are shown in red, which means that it's warm ocean water, and others are shown in blue, which is telling us that it's cold ocean water that's forming around our poles. If we looked at each individual gyre, we would see that each one actually has 4 main currents that make up each one. And all of this is due to something that's called the Coriolis effect. And the Coriolis effect is something that happens due to the fact that Earth is constantly rotating. We rotate once every single day, which gives us our 24-hour day. But as the Earth is rotating, it causes things along our surface to move. So instead of moving in a straight line, the rotation of our planet is going to make it look like these things are spinning around in a circle. And depending on which hemisphere we're in, we're going to see that it's going to move to the left or to the right of the equator. In our northern hemisphere, the Coriolis effect will always move the surface currents to the right, making it look like it has a clockwise pattern to that gyre. On the other hand, our southern hemisphere, the Coriolis effect causes things to look like they're moving towards the left. And overall, this is going to create a counterclock motion within our oceans. So each one of those gyres is just made up of 4 smaller components that are each one affected by the Coriolis effect. Because the Earth is rotating and spinning in space, it basically caused the materials at our surface to rotate as well. One of the things that I pointed out on a previous slide was the difference between warm currents and cold currents. It just tells us simply whether the water is warmer or colder. But these surface currents are going to have a really big impact on our climate in different areas. So our warm currents are taking heat from our equator and they're taking it into our higher latitudes, our polar regions. So it takes warm water and takes it into colder areas. And we see the exact opposite happening with our cold currents. Most of these start out in our high latitudes, like our polar regions, and then move towards our tropics or the equator. So they're bringing cold water towards warmer areas of the ocean. Overall, having warm water moving into cold regions and cold water moving into warm regions is going to overall help balance out or moderate the effect of climate on our planet. And as these currents move, depending on their temperature, they're either going to chill or warm the air, and they're either going to increase or decrease the aridity.